Hi everyone, thanks for coming to Oxford Humanities and Social Sciences workshop for the Australian curriculum this afternoon. My name's Anne McKenna and I'm a humanities publisher at Oxford University Press in Melbourne. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands on which we create and share our learning resources. We acknowledge the traditional owners as the original storytellers, teachers and students of the land we call Australia, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. We also extend that respect to all Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. I'll give a quick run through of today's workshop. We'll be covering the key changes to the structure and content of the new Australian curriculum for the 4 humanities subjects, and we will be giving some teaching strategies for geography, history and civics and citizenship. Unfortunately, time is not going to allow us to do the same for economics, so we'll just be focusing on the changes, curriculum changes there. We'll be spending just a couple of minutes looking at how to fit it all in the timetable squeeze, and then I'll introduce our new series for the Australian curriculum, and hopefully we'll have time for a few questions. I'd just like to start by introducing our presenters and consultants. So today we have Majella Wessel, who is Head of Humanities at MacGregor State High School in Brisbane, and Kay Bishop, who is Senior Education Officer for Education Queensland and patron of the History Teachers Association. As well as presenting today, Majella and Kay were consultants on our new Australian Curriculum edition, along with Julie Davis, who's a board member of the Australian Geography Teachers Association and co-chair of the Australian Geography Competition. Julie isn't able to join us today, but she's prepared material about her special subject, geography, and Majella will present that. You'll see here on this slide there's a QR code which will enable you to download a guide that we've produced to the Australian Curriculum for Humanities and Social Sciences version 9. So you can download it from this code or from the link that is being put into the chat now, and you will also be able to access it via your digital sample, which we'll give you access to later on. So I'll now hand over to Majella to talk about geography. Thanks, Majella.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I appreciate the time that you're taking, particularly as we all walk towards the end of term 2. So I do appreciate that time. As Anne spoke about, I'm just going to talk you through some key changes to the structure and content of geography, and then talk about how you might integrate that notion of the First Nations perspectives, which is a key consideration in geography in version 9. So in terms of the Australian Curriculum version 9 in geography, we still have the 2 strands of knowledge and understanding and the strand of skills. But therefore, obviously, the geography is compulsory in year 7 and 8. You will notice in the substrand under that knowledge and understanding, you shouldn't notice too many changes, particularly in year 7 and year 8, order in the world, place and livability, landforms and landscapes and changing nations. Where you will notice there is some shifts is in the substrands under the skills. There we've gone from 5 substrands to 4 in that. You can see that there's been a bit of a reallocation of that, and you can see those 4 on your screen there: questioning and researching using geographical methods, interpreting and analysing geographical data and information, concluding and decision making and communicating. In a couple of slides, I'll just talk you through what the changes have been from version 8.4 to 9 in terms of those skills. Similarly, in year 9 and 10, which we know is optional and remains optional in version 9, we've got the substrands of biomes and feed security and geographies of interconnections, as well as environmental change and management and geographies of human well-being. That won't seem unfamiliar for many of you who are currently teaching geography in year 9 and 10. And equally, we've got our 5 skills or substrands of skills have been, I guess, reallocated down into those 4 again. So to speak a little bit more about that, in terms of the reorganisation of skills, skills are still a really important part of geography and still remain an important part of geography in version 9, but you'll just see that there has been a reallocation. So looking at this slide here, you can see in version 8.4, we had observing, questioning and planning, now being reallocated, looking more or now reworded to questioning and researching using geographical methods, collecting, recording, evaluating, and representing. It looks like in this particular instance that representing is no longer there when you come across to version 9. It certainly still sits there. It's now been reallocated into questioning and researching using geographical methods, and also has the opportunity to sit within communicating, interpret, where you will see, I guess, a shift or something that has actually been taken out of the version 9. Evaluating doesn't sit as a skill necessarily in version 9 of the Australian curriculum, but there is still the opportunity for students to reflect and respond there. That now sits in communicating. So whilst there has been a reallocation, the skills are certainly still a huge focus within geography, and it's just that it's been synthesised, I guess, rather than necessarily taken out. So one of the key things, or one of the things that I think is really important when starting to look at version 9 and implementing version 9 into your schools, the key area to jump into across all the HASS subjects, I think, is the content descriptors. But if I'm just going to show you an example in geography that you might do to identify the changes within those content descriptors, because you'll hear a lot in the HASS that there has been a, I guess, minimization of the content. And yes, there has in some cases been a minimization of the content, but what we would actually consider is that they have been, much of the content still actually sits there, and much of what you're currently doing in version 8.4 you'll continue to do in version 9. It's just that they have those content descriptors now read a little bit differently. So if you look at this example of the Year 7 water in the world, you can see that those first two content descriptors in 8.4 now really sit as, have been merged, I guess, into one clear content descriptor, where students are looking at the classification of environmental resources and the way that water connects and changes places as it moves through the environment. So there is a slight shift where we're not looking at necessarily how it affects places, but we're now looking at how it changes places. In that next one, you can see that there hasn't been a significant change. What the significant change there is the emphasis on focusing on First Nations Australians. That certainly doesn't mean that in version 9, if you have some great resources to be able to look at the peoples of the Asian region or Asia region that you have been doing in 8.4, that you can't continue to do that. It just means that in your classes, the emphasis will be on First Nations Australians and their value of water in terms of economic, cultural and spiritual and aesthetic value of water. Similarly, if we go down a little bit further, causes, impacts and responses to a hazard still sits there, but now we're actually looking specifically at the responses from communities and governments. I imagine in most of your classes, that's sort of the responses you've been looking at anyway. So whilst there has been a slight shift, it is not something that I think many of us will have to look at throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, and so on and so forth. I guess what I'm trying to show here is something that I think is really important when you're starting to look at the new curriculum or the version 9 of the curriculum, is to spend some time identifying what has, in terms of those content descriptors, what has stayed the same, what has changed and what has been added, so you can start to look at where it is that you need to spend most of your time if it is that you need to create some new resources. As we spoke just before, in terms of geography, one of the key things that sits in geography as a consideration in version 9 is the emphasis on First Nations perspectives across all of the HASS subjects. That actually, I have to say, and particularly in geography, there's some really explicit links within the content descriptors. I'm not going to read all of those content descriptors off the screen there, but you can see that we've got a couple of new content descriptors, one in Year 7 and one in Year 10, and a couple of existing content descriptors that sit there in Year 8 and Year 10 that you can already see some really explicit links to being able to embed First Nations perspectives into your classes. in doing that, I guess a couple of the things to consider when teaching First Nations perspectives, and this doesn't necessarily just sit in geography, but across all of your subjects, that consideration that our First Nations people and then their connection to culture is continuous and contemporary. So sometimes we often talk about our First Nations people and being based in the ancient and modern past, but in terms of time and in terms of connection to culture, it's not linear, it's circular in First Nations people's ideas of time. So that's really important to kind of consider in delivering protocols. One of the things that I think is really important to consider in delivering First Nations perspectives, it's really important to consider the protocols that in terms of who, what, when, where, why, in terms of that delivery. One of the key things that I think I can share with you, or one of the key resources to share with you, is actually the Oxfam website. It gives you a really lovely, concise understanding of some of those protocols for you and your staff to be able to have a little bit of professional learning in terms of what those protocols actually are before you start doing or before you start delivering within your classrooms. Knowing your country, where you're located. So I know we're all across Australia today, but it's knowing which country it is that you're located on, and also the country that you're teaching about. And a really easy way to do that is to actually, if you see down the bottom there, that HASS website has a great map that you can either order, and it's not a lot of money, order for each of your classes to have printed off. That really is a lovely artifact to show students which country they're on, and also which country you might be teaching about. Another thing I would do is maybe make some connections to your local First Nations organisations. One way you can do that is to jump on your local council website, where they will have an opportunity, will have information for you about how you can make connections with local land councils. Many of the state libraries, I know, for example, the Queensland and South Australian state libraries certainly have a large Indigenous collection, as well as library guides, and all of those resources are available on site. So if you online, sorry. So if you can't actually access both within, or you're not actually in a capital city itself, all of those resources are actually available online. And as I pointed out, the HASS website is also a really key resource that you might be able to utilise in thinking about teaching First Nations perspectives. With that in mind, probably one really nice activity that you might be able to do in your first lesson, potentially in that Year 7 unit, or even in your 8, 9 or 10 units, is to actually look at that idea of country, because much of the Aboriginal art that exists and that we have access to see represents maps of country. And so what you might be able to do is, using some of those Aboriginal artworks, you might get students to actually map some of those features of country from those artworks onto either a digital or a paper satellite map. They might even be able to then access the CSIRO Indigenous Seasons calendar, and in accessing that, that gives them information where they can find out about the seasons, and you might then get them to use some little fact cards to create fact cards around that map. And even the BOM Indigenous Weather Portal will also give your students an opportunity to look at different weather patterns according to our First Nations perspectives. So an example of that you can see, and it's not a full example, but something that you might do with your class when you're first introducing, is to get them to find the country that they're on. Look at a couple of the artworks that you might be able to find at your local or some local galleries, or equally, and I'm happy to share some of these websites with you. The Australian Screen Institute has a wonderful documentary that actually shows a number of Aboriginal artworks that you might be able, First Nations artworks that you might be able to use for the students to interpret features of country. and then on the outside be able to create some of those fact cards that you can see there. So as you can see, that's only one small example, but perhaps by if students were working in groups, or even by the end of the unit, when you had actually looked at a number of countries, you might find that you have a really lovely artifact at the back or somewhere in your room, if you were to do this as a print, that the students can reference themselves to. I'm going to hand over to Kay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity to actually, hang on, I'm just going to start my thing, to talk to you about history. We're going to look at the, just a summary of the key changes and an activity to actually engage all students. And this is important because the ACARA has made, put a focus on equity and excellence, as has the Education Department in Queensland. In other words, engaging all students and giving all students the opportunity to succeed. Hang on. The major changes have been the reduction in content and the refocus on what is compulsory in the history course. And of course, in particular, and picking up from Majella, the First Nations history component here, the deep time history of Australia. And that means new resources that you'd have to work on and develop. And the Oxford history has actually a chapter on this deep time history of Australia. And that's a compulsory unit. And of course, you have to do 2 units in year 7. And you can still use what you had were doing before on Greece, Rome, Egypt, China, whichever one you like. Now, when you look at the Australian curriculum, you will find that it looks a bit different. It looks a little bit more, much more compact. This is because, for example, sections such as, looking at the geography of these different parts of countries in the ancient world, and they actually specify particular geographical features, such as in Egypt, the Nile. And what they've got now is just one statement about the geography of these places, whichever of these civilizations that you do. And as far as the skills are concerned, they have been, they're much the same. Questioning and researching has now been combined. But I think the second dot point is the most important one, using historical sources. And that's an all encompassing term that deals with everything you do with sources, which is actually central to history in terms of just identifying information sources, evaluating the reliability of them, looking at how much they can be trusted, or this sort of thing. Okay, so, and the Australian curriculum spells that out quite specifically there. And historical perspectives and interpretations, and there's an important emphasis on interpretations. In particular, the fact that the Australian curriculum now says that students should be able to put their own interpretations on the past as well, not just look at other interpretations. In year 8, for example, there is a substrand that is compulsory now, which includes medieval Europe, the Renaissance, and emergence of the modern world. You can choose one of those topics to do, but you must do one of those. And as well as that, any of the other 2 topics, empires and expansions, and the Asia-Pacific world. They have been rejigged, okay, and actually given and summarized in different ways. And in year 9, the substrands, there are 2 compulsory units now. The usual one, World War I, and now making and transforming the Australian nation is now compulsory. This is not really a new unit. You'll find that, for example, the content is actually much of what was in some of the early units. So you can probably use a lot of the material that you were already using. There are other units that you can choose: the Industrial Revolution, and Asia and the world. But that's if you want to actually use 3 units, if you choose to. And in year 10, the World War II is still compulsory, and Building Modern Australia replaces the Rights and Freedoms compulsory unit. And so a lot of what's in that unit, however, now that new unit is actually what was in the Rights and Freedoms unit. So you can still use a lot of the material that you were using before. Now, the major changes: there are 2 substrands to be studied per year instead of 3. Mind you, I think a lot of schools were only ever doing 2 substrands anyway in history. Years 9 and 10 each have 2 compulsory substrands now, whereas it was only year 10 in the past. New compulsory substrand in year 7, the Deep Time History of Australia. This is new. It is challenging. If you don't use, you might want to build on the resources that Oxford University has presented too, but you've got it all together in this particular textbook. New topics in year 8, for example, that are compulsory, the medieval world. If you hadn't done the medieval world or the Renaissance, you now are going to have to do one of those, or the emergence of the modern world. New compulsory substrands in year 9 and in year 10, but a lot of the content descriptions are what you probably were always familiar with. And those rights and freedoms one, for example, now largely included in the new substrand. This, of course, was a political decision, and that's the basis of it. You know, the minister insisted a greater focus on Australian history. And what ACARA has done is actually use that in terms of the titles of units as well. The historical concepts, what is now missing is actually empathy, okay? And interpretation and contestability now replaces just contestability. And so you will see, for example, that's just one change. And what I'm going to now is look at ways to actually deal with making history accessible to everybody in your classroom. And history, the focus is always on sources. And we tend to often think of written sources, but you can use visual sources very effectively in the classroom. For example, written sources can be challenging because of language, and especially difficult for students with lower literacy skills. But a visual source, you want your students to say, and my first thing I want a student to say is, hang on, I can do this, okay? I can do this. And the next thing is, well, history is going to be interesting and engaging, okay? And you can do that with visual sources. You can't just rely on visual sources all the time, but you can start off with visual sources. And so there are 2 ways to deal with this. You can start with single elements of a picture, or you can start with the whole picture and then move into single elements. I'm just going to demonstrate this now. For example, this is an image from the Oxford textbook, and it's the assassination of Julius Caesar. This is an 18th century painting by an Italian artist. Obviously, it's a secondary source. Okay, we don't have any images of the assassination of Caesar. We do have verbal descriptions, however, of it, okay, from Plutarch and others. But if you start, for example, with the first image, just a small, narrow thing of Caesar, all you have to do is actually ask students to describe what they see, okay, just describe what they see. Another way, and one thing I would always use is do this with an individual student, have them pair up, and then have them actually look at the whole class contribute. So think, pair, share kind of activity with this. Quite often students are actually a bit, not very keen to actually do group work to start with. But if you stage it with them, and it's less confronting for those. I actually hate group work, I'll tell you so, but it's less confronting for those who actually don't find this comfortable. So you look at an image. You also get kids to ask questions about that. Okay, so and make sure that you focus on details. I mean, what sort of what does he have in his head? What color are the clothes that this person has? What kind of clothes does this person has? Right down to the finest detail that you can, and have the kids ask questions. And then you actually move to a bigger version of the image. And as you can see on the right, this is the whole image. But then you actually have a look at, and it changes the whole thing, because you can ask students to think, well, what do you think this person is doing? Okay, why is this person looking in a particular direction? And the second image actually shows you why that person is doing that. And you actually see a quite horrendous scene there of a whole lot of individuals with knives raised and this poor man, the fear on his face. And you don't need to tell these students that this is the assassination of Caesar. This will actually spoil the whole task if you tell them what it is. So don't tell them anything like that. Have them try to work out, well, what's going on here? Who's doing what? And if you look in particular, for example, you'll see an image there of why is this man turning his face away? And in actual fact, that's Brutus, because he actually does not want to see what he's doing. Okay, and then you get the whole picture, and you can actually look at it because you've got other senators there, you've got other people there not involved, and of course they don't know it's senators at the moment. Other people not involved in what's going on. There's a group of people who would simply stabbing this individual in the middle, but others are standing back. They're looking horrified. In the background, you've got two people, and you've got a statue there, and you can actually. Would take at least 2 lessons, I think, to do this if you wanted to, and build on this. Well, and have kids ask questions. Well, why are these men behaving like this? Who is this person? Okay, that's being stabbed. Why is this person being stabbed? You can actually use this as an introduction to the whole section on the Roman Republic and the end of the Roman Republic. Okay, because then you can move backwards. Well, hang on, this man was Caesar. What did he do to actually deserve this kind of treatment? And why is everybody stabbing? Why are there so many people stabbing him? Okay, and of course, the agreement, it was a conspiracy, and in that conspiracy, they all agreed that everybody had to be stabbed. You might let me know, I think, Anne, if I'm running when I'm closer to time. Okay, because my stopwatch is stopped here. Okay,
Kate, just another, say, 2 minutes. Thanks.
Okay. And so there's a lot that you can actually have students do here, because all they have to do is be able to see things and ask questions, and then you also ask questions of them, and it's actually a valuable exercise for students. Another way is you could actually start with the full image, and then have them actually zoom in on particular areas. So you could, for example, just cut out sections of the image and have them say, okay, let's look at this closely. You look at the whole image. What's going on here? What's happening? Who are these people, etc. And then you look at, for example, well, what's the statue? Is this a statue significant? Okay, and of course it is. It's the statue of Pompey. Okay, one of the great rivals of Caesar earlier. And you've got, for example, a close-up of Caesar's face. Is it fear? Is it actually defiance? What is it? Okay. And you've got in the background there are 2 men, and that's in the background. It's actually Mark Antony, and the senators, the conspirators were actually making sure Mark Antony wasn't there to save Caesar. Okay. And one of the things you should also do then is actually give students the written text that actually describes Caesar's assassination. This artist was not there. He's interpreting what he sees. Okay, you can pick out, ask kids to look at anomalies. For example, senators didn't wear coloured robes. They all wore white robes with crimson trim. They were not in coloured robes. This particular artist is very famous for his use of colour. Okay, so he throws it in because, and you could ask students, well, why has he used colour? What's the purpose of it? Because he actually is highlighting Caesar and various things like that. So lots of things you can discuss with students about the use of colour there, and what the purpose of the artist is. And then look at, for example, Plutarch's description of the death of Caesar. If they've seen it, then the actual verb, the written part of it that they might have difficulty with is actually going to have much more meaning to them. And this is better to start with an image than actually have the written part, because it makes meaning to them then, because you do want to go into the written part. You do want to look at the ancient sources. Okay.
Thanks, Kay. We might have to move on to civics now.
That's fine. Yep, finished there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone, again. So as Anne said, and thank you, Kay, as Anne said, I'm just going to take you through some of the changes to economics and business, or what economics and business, the structure looks like, as well as civics and citizenship, and then just give you a little example of how you might embed civics and citizenship and teach that in context, given some of the timetable structures and things that sit that mean that it can be a little more difficult to fit these two subjects of HASS into a school timetable. So with that in mind, There hasn't been a significant number of changes to economics and business. We still have the two strands of knowledge and understanding and the skills strand. In year we all have those topics. In year 7, you can see that topic there. Year 8, we've got the markets. Year 9, international trade and interdependence. And in year 10, productivity, growth and living standards. And then you can also see we still have our skills are still really important within economics and business, questioning and researching, interpreting and analysing, particularly really important in economics and business, getting students ready for those for senior. We've got evaluating, concluding and decision making is a really important skill, and then communicating. I guess the key, and it's not really a change, but a key emphasis that's come from version 9 of the Australian curriculum is that economics and business offered as a subject together, not necessarily as a subject or two different subjects, is compulsory now in year 7 and 8, and continues to be optional in 9 and 10. We know in version 8.4 it was compulsory, but it has been really specifically emphasised by ACARA that this is a compulsory subject and needs to be offered to our year 7s and 8s as a subject. Similarly with civics and citizenship, not a significant number of changes. We've still got knowledge and understanding and skills, and then we have those substrands across 7 to 10, government and democracy, laws and citizens and citizenship, diversity and identity, and then those key skills of questioning and researching, analysis, evaluation and interpretation, civic participation and decision making. I'll talk a little bit more about that one. That's been a key consideration that now sits in version 9, and communicating. So similarly, not a significant number of changes, but once again, having taught in a couple of schools and having now talked to a number of states across Australia, understandably, this might be a bit of a change for some schools who don't, at this point in time, offer civics and citizenship as a standalone subject in their year 7 and 8 program. It now, ACARA has made it pretty clear that it is compulsory in year 7 and 8 and optional in year 9 and 10. With that in mind, what I thought I would do is just take you through how you might look to embed civics and citizenship if you're particularly a school that isn't currently doing this as a standalone subject itself, and you're wanting to kind of jump into what that might be able to look like given the timetable constraints that might sit in your school. One of the key things you might, or something that you might look to do, is to focus on that skill of civic participation and decision making. As I said, it's a key consideration in version 9 of the Australian curriculum. So if you're a school that's just jumping in, this might be a way to do this. Also, it's just a really, of all of the skills, particularly in civics and citizenship, this is a really nice one where students can do lots of hands-on things in the classroom, and you can find that they're participating and can become highly engaged. So, for example, if I'm just to take an example there, in year 7, we have the government and democracy unit. One of those content descriptors that students need to look at, which has actually moved from year 8 or be exposed to, is the characteristics of Australia's democracy, including freedom of speech, association, assembly, religion and movement. And they also need to be able to explain the methods or strategies related to making decisions about civic participation. So with that in mind, what you might be able to do is actually get your students to engage in and create an online petition where they actually present that to the school community, and you make that something that actually comes alive in the classroom, but also for the school community. So we've got that, I guess, association with active citizenship and participation. This across 2 to 3 lessons, I imagine you might like to do this, building up their knowledge and understanding of different ways to participate. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that could look like. Do a bit of a deep dive into petitions and this growing move to an online petition. Get them as a class, or you could do the dreaded group work, as Kay says, that you could have them work in groups to actually present a few different petitions of their likes, get them to actually create that, and then be able to analyse and evaluate its effectiveness. So you might just start your class with a bit of a brainstorm about issues that are currently important to them, just to get them starting to think about issues before moving them into exploring those range of ways to participate. And I guess there is a lot that sits in that particular content descriptor. And sometimes when I see that, or there is a fair bit sitting in a content descriptor, a really cool strategy that you might like to use is the jigsaw strategy. Gives students an opportunity to be able to become an expert in a particular area and then share back to their home group. So as you can see there, particularly in this particular content descriptor, there is a lot of content. They need to look at voting, standing for parliament, committees, direct action, protest petitions, and social media campaigns. So given the time constraints, this might be a nice or a really effective strategy to be able to use to ensure that students have the opportunity to explore each of those ways. And from there, you might do a deep dive into petitions. A really nice and useful website to use or resource to use is change.org to introduce them to this idea of online petitions and the idea that lots of different people can come up with petitions, and we can all be active citizens in our communities. You can search in the search bar for particular petitions that are pertinent to your area, or the area of your school, or the area that you're teaching in. And just have a little look at the purpose, the audience, get them to look at the structure and the language demands that sit within a petition, the idea that a petition is probably far less formal than an essay, and what sort of language is used with that, and unpack a few petitions before getting them to actually engage and brainstorm some petitions, as I said, or some ideas for petitions. Some topical issues at the moment might be mobile phones in schools, uniform, the idea, we might have some really active citizens in your class who want to see more recycling at their school, and I guess get them to brainstorm a change that they'd like to see within their school, gather some more information and do some research. They could then draft that. They might consider doing an e-petition and then getting them to actually present that to an audience. The idea of then being able to come back a couple of lessons later and actually reflect on that using a similar, I guess, strategy, something like a think, pair, share, where they need to think about those methods and steps for creating a petition, and then evaluate that effectiveness. Not necessarily straight after, because they'd obviously need to present that, but that gives them that opportunity for some spaced learning, where it might be a couple of weeks later that you're actually getting them to reflect and coming back to looking at petitions, not necessarily putting all that content all into one idea, and then getting them that notion of spaced learning. And then if you were to continue with that, and as I say, that wouldn't be a whole unit, but if you're looking to maybe start to introduce civics into your schools, civic participation, I guess, is probably the one that I would jump into. So you could, in year 8, look at them drafting a bill or creating a bill for student leadership and school leadership. In year 9, linked to some of the content that's covered, they could actually create a class constitution, and obviously at the moment, and probably will continue to be for the next few years, a really nice opportunity to start to discuss the voice to parliament in your classes. And then in year 10, there's the opportunity, based on some of the content that sits in the year 10 unit, they could create, or they could actually hold a mock protest or a school protest within your school setting. Just last but not least, I guess, just going to take you through, and I think this will be shared, I believe this will be shared with you afterwards. Just take you very quickly through the timetable. Obviously, there's 4 subjects. Fitting it all in can be difficult, as we probably have nicely demonstrated to you today, trying to squeeze so much in. But if you are a with year 7 and 8, obviously there are 4 compulsory subjects, the 4 compulsory subjects. Hopefully in most of your schools, students are doing humanities for the whole year. So with that in mind, based on what sits in each of those 4 subjects, a suggestion might be that in semester 1, which is approximately kind of 18 to 20 weeks, depending which school you're in, week 1 to 14, looking at history and covering those 2 depth studies there, and then doing civics and citizenship in week 15 to 19, and then in semester 2, equally looking at geography and covering those two units there, and then week 15 to 19 looking at economics and business, just because those particular subjects generally go, when you're delivering it, some of the content actually crosses across those particular subjects, and you might find that they work together better. But once again, I guess that's just a suggestion. It could look different in your schools too. Equally in year 9 and 10, we've obviously got the compulsory subject of history, and then we have those 3 other subjects which are in year 9 and 10 electives. So with that in mind, depending on what it looks like in your school, in either semester 1 or 2, on that compulsory line, giving students the opportunity to look at history, and it could be that they do 18 to 19 to 20 weeks of history, or it might be that you look at covering out those 2 substreams in 13 weeks and maybe exposing them to one particular unit in geography, economics and business, or civics and citizenship, or, as I said, looking at history and then looking at offering geography, economics and business, and civics and citizenship just as an elective. I'm actually going to hand now back to Anne, who's going to take you through.
Thanks very much, Majella and Kay. That was really great. Lots of good information squeezed into a very short time, so thank you for that. So now I'd like to introduce our new series, which is called Oxford Humanities and Social Sciences 7 to 10 for the Australian curriculum. This is a brand new resource which is purpose-written for version 9 of the Australian curriculum, and it offers complete coverage of the 4 humanities subjects from year 7 to 10. It's available in some different configurations depending on what your school requirements are. So we have a print and digital version, which is the student book, plus an OBook Pro. OBook Pro is Oxford's name for an ebook. There's a digital only student book, and then there's a teacher OBook as well. So some key features of the student books. We've got we're giving you access to an online sample in which you will find digital samples of all 4 student books and some sample resources for year 7, chapter 9, Ancient Egypt, as well as that guide to the Australian curriculum that I mentioned earlier. I'm just going to skip through the print features, because what I really want to show you is the digital walkthrough. So we are going to share this presentation with you, so you will be able to have a look at these features both in the presentation and in the sample books that we provide to you. So I will just skip through these quickly. One thing I do want to point out is that we have 2 STEAM projects per year level. This is a unique feature for Oxford. So each of the HASS, science and maths books in each year level have the same 2 STEAM projects in, obviously different projects for each year level. And the idea is to make STEAM easier to implement across the year level. Excuse me, if you have all 3 of our books. So the STEAM projects include some real world problems for students to consider, Australian curriculum links for each subject, guidance through the design cycle, and some digital resources to support students and teachers. So let's have a look at our digital platform and products. If you're using our Big Ideas series, which is now quite old, you will notice a really big difference in our digital platform. So we've got integrated content and tools from our partners, including Quizlet and Lunosity. Lunosity is a platform that enables us to create interactive activities with a wide range of question types. And we're proud to announce our very new partner, just as of the last month or so, is ClickView. So we are partnering with ClickView to create brand new key content videos to cover every content description in the new Australian curriculum. The first 50 of these will be available for Year 7 in Term 1 next year, and we'll be covering all the other topics with existing links to existing ClickView content, and then we'll gradually replace those with our own key content videos. So now I'd like to take a look at our new platform. We have, rather than wrestle with a live demonstration in which the internet invariably lets us down, we've recorded a walkthrough video, so I will play that for you now. So this is the home page for Oxford Digital, and I'm going to sign in as a teacher. I'll sign in as a student later to show you that side of things. So this is our library page. Any books I've got access to will show here on my bookshelf, and this sample library contains our guide to the HASS curriculum that I mentioned earlier, as well as complete copies of our 7 to 10 student books. And in Year 7, there's a sample of digital resources, which I'll show you later. So from this library page, I can download any of my titles for offline access using iBook Offline, and this replaces PDF downloads, and there are detailed instructions that show you how to do that. But for now, let's go back and take a closer look at the Year 7 sample. So this is the welcome page for Year 7. For the samples, we've got quite a bit of text here about curriculum changes and product availability, but we won't usually have that much text here. There's notifications section down the bottom, which will show anything you've assigned to students, as well as any marking you might need to do. And then across the top, we've got tabs that help get you where you want to go more quickly. So we're on the home screen now. But by clicking resources, you can view and assign any resource from the book. Assigned work, you can access and monitor anything you've assigned across your classes and check the progress of your students. And reports provides an electronic workbook. So I'll show you more on those later. But let's jump into the student book, because you can also view and assign resources and check results from within the e-reader. So here I can click on Read and launch the product, or I can click on that pink icon and download it for offline use. But let's click Read and open the e-reader. So the interactive menu down the left-hand side opens by default, and you can expand each chapter to show each topic. You can maximise the reading view at any time by clicking Function F11 and then click back again to go back to the menu view. And there's several tools down the bottom. The book content button opens the menu back up whenever you need it. The resources button lets you see all the resources for the topic, and you can assign resources from here, and we'll do that shortly. The notes button lets you highlight and make notes on anything in the student book. So you can see here that I've highlighted some text and added a note for students to study this. And I can share that note with a single student or a small group or the whole class. And that's really handy if you want to direct a student's learning, for example, if they've missed some class time. So the bookmarking functionality lets you tag particular pages, but the e-reader does automatically remember where you were at the end of the session and opens up at that page next time you log in. Every iBook comes with the Oxford Concise Australian Dictionary built in for free. So I can type a word directly into the search bar and the definition will appear, or I can highlight a word or words on the page and click the dictionary icon, and the definitions appear at left, and I can scroll through them. There's also a magnifying glass tool that lets me zoom in and out. And there's a navigation bar where I can turn the page or go directly to a page of my choice. So I'm going to head back to topic 9.3. Your digital login for the sample contains the resources for this topic. And these little blue circles are hotspots for resources that will open just by clicking on them. Or I can open them from the resources panel, as well as any of the other resources for this topic. So I'm going to assign my students some homework. So I click on these two activities, Check Your Learning and Quiz Me. And I click Assign. And that brings up a calendar where I select the date I want the resource assigned and when it's due. And then I need to select my students. I'm going to assign it to the whole class, but I can also assign it to selected students. Now I click Apply, and the system generates a name for the assignment, but I can change that if I want. Each student gets a notification about the homework, but I can also send them an email as a backup, so I'm doing that. And that's now been assigned. So I'll log in as a student shortly to complete those tasks, but I just want to show you an example of the new video content that we will be adding to this edition. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a new partnership with ClickView to both link to their existing content and to produce new key content videos aligned to the curriculum. So I'll play you a grab from one of those key content videos. It is just a section of it, and it's still in draft form, so there are a couple of errors in the voiceover that will be fixed, and the final versions will have captions as well.
By the end of this video, you'll be able to describe the key beliefs, values, and practices associated with everyday life in ancient Egypt. Very few people in the ancient Egypt learnt to read and write. Because of this skill, they were highly respected. In the early years of the civilization, the ancient Egyptian writing system was made up of hieroglyphs, picture-like symbols representing objects or ideas. Later, simpler forms of writing, called hieratic and demotic scripts, were developed for quicker day-to-day communication.
So that's just an example. These videos will be 3 to 5 minutes long, tending more towards 3 minutes at the lower levels and 5 at sort of 9 and 10. If you're interested in looking at another one of these videos in the Year 7 sample that you've been given access to, there's another video in chapter 7, which is the deep time chapter. So back to our sample topic 9.3, and we've got a new approach to lesson plans for this edition, which are more detailed and structured with timed activities and links to specific activities and external websites. You'll find this plan for 9.3 in your digital sample. There are some other lesson plans in chapter 9, but they aren't yet in the new format. So you can see there the other resources that we've got for this topic that you can have a play with as well. So now I'm going to log out as a teacher and log in as a student to show you that side of things. So clicking on Year 7, and in my notifications panel, there are the Quiz Me and the Check Your Learning activities that the teachers assigned me. So I'm going to start with Check Your Learning, and I'll just click on that tile to open it directly. So through the magic of video, we're going to speed through these questions, which are a mixture of auto-mark questions and ones that require teacher marking. We'll look at those in a moment. So I submit the activity, and you'll see here that I'm being told my quiz has been submitted and was with the teacher for marking. So while I'm waiting for that to happen, I'll jump back onto the Quiz Me, and you can see there that the Check Your Learning is marked as completed from the student. And again, we'll whiz through this quiz. These questions are all auto-marked, so I'll get an instant result. So under my recent result there, I can see how I performed overall. And by clicking on Review Result, I can see how I performed question by question and see the correct answers. So now I'm going to log out as a student and back in as a teacher to do some marking. So in the notification section at the bottom, I can see I've got some marking to do. So I will click on this pending icon. And award some marks and leave some comments for this student. So I can submit the marks to each student one by one, or I can mark the whole class first and go back to adjust the marks if I want. I can also save my work in case I get interrupted in the middle of marking. So now I'm going to go to the Reports tab to see how everyone's going. There's two types of reports for every student, an assessment report and a curriculum report. The assessment report shows how each student's performing in terms of marks and engagement. And I can drill down to the individual question level for every student to see how they went. And the system highlights their performance as above, on or below level. So I can see who's doing well and who might need a bit of support. I can filter that colour coding, or I can turn it off if I don't want to see it. So the curriculum report lets me track student performance against content descriptions in the curriculum. Each interactive question is tagged with an AC curriculum code. So if I click on the Ancient World substrand, I can see how each student's performing against the content descriptions. And the last thing I want to show you are these couple of tabs at the top. So under the Resources tab, you'll find all the teacher and student resources in one place. And you can apply filters to find specific resources. And this little eye icon in the top left corner of some means the resource is hidden from students, but you can assign it to them if you want. And that might be a worksheet or answers if you want them to self-mark. The Assigned Work tab gives you a summary of what work you've assigned and when it's due and who's completed it. And then you can delete that as you're finished with it. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the online components for Oxford HASS, for the Australian Curriculum and Oxford Digital. I just want to mention that some of the functionality I've shown you, like the teacher marked questions, is still in development, so you won't be able to play with that on your sample, but it will be ready for back to school in 2024. So now I'm going to pass over to one of our sales team now, who will take you over the pricing and availability dates for the series.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris. I'm one of the sales consultants in Queensland, and I'm going to take you through pricing and pricing structures. Now, if you have any questions, certainly put that in the Q&A section. But I also would highly recommend that you speak directly to your consultant in your local state. So the pricing options here are these are our consumer pricing structures. As Anne mentioned earlier, there is the combination of Student Book and O-Book Pro, so your blended option, $69.95. Now that gives the students, there is a code in the front of the book, and that gives them digital access for 1 year, and then a reactivation after that is $24.95, and that applies each year after that. The student-only digital is $49.95, and that price structure is per student per year. And the Teacher O book, as a standalone product, is just under $300. But for schools that adopt the student book or the digital for whole class, then that actually becomes free for the teachers, because no sense the students having access and the teachers not knowing what they're doing. So we like to give that to those schools that are adopting the books. Now, we also have done some packages up here where we are actually publishing for humanities and HASS, for science, for maths, and also for English. So there is a value pack that is the print and digital of $169. And again, digital access for 1 year and a reactivation of $24.95 per student per year per subject. And then the value package for the digital for a 4-year commitment. Now, we know that most schools, when you adopt a program, you don't tend to see your results until year 3. So what we've actually done is put together a reasonable package there for 3 or 4 years of $109.95 as a digital package that you can then that gives you all 4 products. Now, please do speak to your individual schools, because like if you're shopping for a car, there goes one past my house quite loudly. If you're shopping for a car, you walk into a Toyota dealership, you ask a price of the salesperson, they'll give you a set price. But if you go in as the CEO of a company, you'll then actually get a different price. That's what you need to speak to your local consultant about. There are packages for institutional buys, commitments, and ongoing for multiple packages. So if you'd like to speak to your local consultant about that, they will more than able to help you out. Now, to help you out, to get in contact, if you don't know your consultant, now I look after Queensland, North Queensland and Central Queensland and north of Brisbane. But if you don't know who they are, you can actually scan this QR code, and that will actually take you through to our consultants page, and you'll find out the consultant for your area. So whether that's in ACT, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, or wherever you're from, your local consultant will be able to help you out with some pricing options there for you. That is all from me. And if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A, and I'll hand back over to Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'd just like to also say, ask you to stay online and complete the survey so that you can get your free copy of the text when it becomes available. Had to mention that. No questions at the moment. So if there's anything coming through, just let us know. It's been lovely to see the emojis popping up every so often. That's nice feedback while we're presenting. But if there are no questions, I would just like to thank you all for coming at the end of another busy day. Thanks very much. Let us know if you have any feedback or any questions. We'd be happy to chat to you. Otherwise, thank you very much.